Hello art beaters, Becky with artbeads.com, and I've got a brand new video for you today. Today I'm going to show you how to make our fire polish frenzy bracelet. This is a bracelet that showcases the beauty of check glass fire polished beads wonderfully, and it's made with a simple brick stitching technique. What I've done is I made brick stitch frames around half of each fire polished bead and then stitched those brick stitch frames together in alternating up and down patterns to make a fun kind of curvy beaded look. So I'm going to show you how to do that today and what you're going to need to get started. So let's dive in. Alright, so this is our Fire Polish Frenzy bracelet. I just made brick stitch frames around half of each of these 8mm fire polished beads, and I embellished those frames with even more fire polished beads. And then once I made those little half circle frames for each fire polished bead, I stitched those frames together in a fun little curvy pattern and then added a clasp to each end with some jump rings. So to make this project, you're going to need 8mm check glass fire polished beads. I used alternating colors here, so I've picked out some fun green colors for today. You'll also need 6mm fire polished beads and 4mm fire polished beads. Our fire polished beads typically come on a strand, so you'll have plenty of work to work with on those strands. You're also going to need some 8/0 round seed beads. I used 3 different colors here today, so I have got 3 colors to match these beads I'm working with. You're also going to need a beading needle. I've got a size 12 beading needle and some beading thread. I've got some Toho 1G thread in a matching purple color. You're also going to need 2 jump rings and a clasp of your choosing to finish the bracelet as well. And to attach those jump rings, you'll also need some chain nose pliers, so keep that in mind. You're basically creating these little brick stitch frames around each 8mm bead individually and then stitching them all together later. So to start, I've cut about a 3-foot length of thread and added it to my needle, and I'm going to add one of my 8mm fire polished beads to the thread. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a tail about 6 inches long, and I'm going to come back through the other side of that hole in the bead. And that's going to give me a little strand of thread on one side of the bead. I'm actually going to do that again, so I have 2 strands of thread on one side of the bead. There. Now I'm going to start the brick stitch frame around this bead. So I'm going to pick up 2 of my seed beads, and I'm going to use this matte gold color for the first row, and I'm going to bring my thread, my needle, under those 2 thread strands on the side of my bead. And while you're doing this, make sure to keep pulling the tail tight too. That'll keep your threads tight to the surface of the bead. So I've got my 2 beads added, and I'm going to go back up through the second bead. And that's basically the start of my first brick stitch row. For this row, I'm going to add 6 beads. And so to continue the row, all you have to do is pick up 1 of those gold seed beads, bring your needle down through those 2 threads, down under those 2 threads, excuse me, pull tight, and then come back up through the bead you just added. And continue until you have 6 beads added to this row. Alright, I've added my 6th and last bead to my first brick stitch row. I'm going to start the next row on an increase, and I am going to use this green color seed bead for the second row. Now I want 8 seed beads in this row. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to start the row on an increase. So to start the row on an increase, you're going to go under that first thread bridge, pull tight and come up through the second seed bead. Now you'll continue this row normally, but you are going to add an extra bead to one of these thread bridges to get 8 total, as well as ending the row on an increase. Typically when you increase the brick stitch on just one, on both ends, it only gives you 1 extra bead. We want 8 beads, so we're going to add an extra bead to one of these thread bridges, and that kind of makes sense with the way these beads are curving. You can see even on this thread bridge I've still got part of the thread bridge showing. That's because it's hitting the curve. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my extra bead here. So I'm adding that next bead to the same thread bridge that I just added to, and then I'll continue the row normally and then end on an increase. So I'm adding a bead to that last thread bridge, and then to end on an increase, I will add another bead to that last thread bridge. All right, we're going to add another increasing row with an extra seed bead added to one of the thread bridges for a total of 10 seed beads in this row. And I'm going to use that metallic purple color we have. So we're starting the row on an increase by adding 2 beads, going under that first thread bridge, getting our beads in place, and then coming back up through that second seed bead. And then continuing the row, and we're going to add an extra seed bead to one of the thread bridges, just like we did in the last row, for a total of 10 seed beads in this row. And I think this next thread bridge will be a good one to add that extra seed bead to. Yep, looks like we've got a good amount of space there. And then we'll just end the row on an increase, like we did for the last row, which is adding another seed bead to the last thread bridge. So really easy to customize the brick stitch technique to whatever look you're going for. All right, ready to add the next row. Okay, for this next row, we are going to start it on an increase. We want 12 beads in this row, so that means that we are going to be adding another extra bead to one of the thread bridges again. And this time we're going to go back to using that metallic green color. So we'll start the row with 2 beads, go back up through that second bead, and then continue the stitch. Somewhere along the way, we're going to add an extra seed bead to one of our thread bridges. As we did before, we're going to end the row on an increase, just like we did before, and this row will have 12 seed beads. Alright, I've finished that last row, and my thread, your thread should be coming out of that last seed bead. Now we're going to start to add the really cool little fire polished fringe on the edge of this brick stitch frame. So you want to position your thread and needle so that it's coming out of this second seed bead, and that's pretty easy to do. I'm just going to come down through that second seed bead and through the last seed bead in the row beneath. And then I'm going to come up through that next seed bead over and then up through that second seed bead. And now I am in position to start adding those fire polished fringe effects. So I'm going to start by adding a 4mm fire polished bead to my thread and then a purple, metallic purple seed bead. And then I'm going to bring that down. I'm going to skip over the seed bead and come back through the fire polished bead. Then I'm going to go back through the seed bead my thread is coming out of to really get that fringe in place. So cute. And then come up through the next seed bead over. To add the next piece of fire polished fringe, you're going to pick up a 6mm seed bead and one of those matte gold seed beads that we started our brick stitch frame with. Then you're going to skip over the seed bead, come back down through the fire polished bead. Instead of going through that same seed bead that the thread is coming out of like we did before, we're going to kind of jump over to the next seed bead over and come down through that one. That's going to give you a little bit better spacing between these 4mm and 6mm fringe pieces. And then you'll come up through that next seed bead over, and then you'll repeat. So I'm going to pick up one of those 4mm fire polished beads, a purple seed bead, and for this one, we will go back through the fire polished bead and go back through the bead the thread is coming out of, like the first 4mm fire polished bead. Come up through the next seed bead over. Add a 6mm fire polished bead and a matte gold seed bead. Come back down through the fire polished bead and then go down through the next seed bead over. Not the one your thread is coming out of, but the next one over, and then come up through the next seed bead. So you want a total of 3 6mm fire polished beads and 4 4mm fire polished beads. And basically you'll end it the way you started, with this last seed bead open. Okay, I've finished adding my fire polished fringe, and now I'm just going to secure and trim my threads. And you do that by weaving your thread kind of back into this brick stitch frame, and you're going to loop that thread around several times, following the thread path to really get it secure, and then you can just trim it. And you're going to do that for the tail as well. We're basically making these little medallions separately and then stitching them all together at the end to make the bracelet. So once you've got this first medallion kind of secured and threads all trimmed, you're going to repeat these steps to make the other one. For the next one, I'm going to use this other 8mm fire polished bead. I'm just going to alternate making those colors. And be careful here not to get your thread kind of caught around these fire polished fringe pieces as you're looping around and securing. And don't poke yourself either. There we go. And that's pretty secure, so I will trim it. And so then you'll just repeat those steps to make these medallions. I made, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these medallions. So 1, 2, 3, 4 in one of the colors of the 8mm fire polished beads, and 3 in the other color. And my wrist is about a size 6, and this is a little loose on me, so I think for a size 7 that would be perfect. So that's what you're going to do. You'll make about 7 or 8 of these little medallions. So I'm going to make a few more of these, and then I will show you how to stitch them together. Okay, now we're going to connect our little brick stitch frame pieces. So it might be helpful to kind of lay these together to see where you're going to connect them. You're not going to connect the rows directly like end bead to end bead, because then your little stripey pattern won't line up. You'd be connecting to this matte gold bead here. What you're going to do is you're going to connect the green bead to the green bead, purple bead to purple bead, green bead to green bead. So you've got this really great stripey pattern, and it's super easy to do. I start off by, I've got my thread coming out of this last seed bead in the top row of brick stitch. I go through all 3 of these beads here. And pull tight. And then I go back up around through these same 3 seed beads on the other piece, just to kind of get them all cinched together. You can't just do that because there will be gaps, so you do want to kind of connect them all individually. So I'm going back down through that first green seed bead, looping back up through the adjacent green seed bead on the other piece. And then I'm going to go down through the green seed bead and the purple seed bead. And you don't want to get caught on your fire polished fringes here. And then I'm going to go through that, just that purple bead on the adjacent piece, and then back down through the purple bead and the third bead, and then back up through that adjacent green bead on the other piece. And you can kind of reinforce, weave through if you feel it needs it. You'll be weaving through to get to the other side to attach the next piece anyway. So there will be a lot of reinforcement happening here. So that's how you attach them. You just keep going. You'll attach them in opposite directions of the last one to get that fun, snaky, curvy pattern. It looks really pretty when it's all put together. I'll also show you how to add the loops for adding your clasp. So let's say this is your last piece added in your bracelet. So you're just going to weave your thread through the bead path of the brick stitch frame to get your thread coming out of that last seed bead there. All you need to do to make a loop for the end of your bracelet is add 7 seed beads to your thread. You can add 7 seed beads of this color or this purple color, any of these seed bead colors. I think I'm going to go with the same color of the bead I'm coming out of, that green color. 3. And you can make this loop smaller or bigger by adding less or more seed beads, depending on what you're attaching to it. I'm just going to use a jump ring. So I'm going to use 7 of these seed beads. And then you simply just come back down through that same seed bead to make the loop. And I'm going to go back up through all of those seed beads to reinforce the loop, especially since that's kind of the connection point of the bracelet. I want to make sure it's really strong. So I'm gonna weave my thread so that I can get it back up through that last bead and then go through all of the seed beads again. It's really easy to get caught on these fringe pieces, but that's okay. This will make your loop a better shape too by reinforcing. And then back down through that last bead. So you'll probably want to do that a couple more times, reinforce a couple more times, then weave your thread back into the body of the brick stitch to secure it, loop it around a bunch, and then trim. And then you would do that on the other end of your bracelet, and then you're all ready to attach a jump ring and a clasp of your choice. So these are actually pretty quick to make, pretty easy techniques. But it looks super intricate and fun, so really great bracelet tutorial. And we do have written instructions for this in our design studio, as well as a supplies list for these original colors here. I've got a link to that in the video description. I'll link these colors that I'm using here today as well, and I will also give you links just to shop our fire polished sizes and our seed bead sizes in general, so you can make your own color palette. It's a really great technique to kind of play around with. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope that you try and make our Fire Polish Frenzy bracelet. It's a really fun one. It looks super intricate, but the technique is actually pretty simple and repetitive to achieve, and it goes by quicker than you'd think for a stitched bracelet, so I definitely recommend you try it. Please leave a like and a comment if you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment too. We're always happy to help, and as always, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you're the first to know when videos like this one are out. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time. Bye.